Okay, so this happens to be one of my favorite units because I think I'm going to throw a little twist at the end. I think it'll make it come alive for you a little bit more. We're going to talk about operating leverage. And I like to use, change the word leverage to the word debt. Debt and leverage are, to me, very interchangeable in finance. If you're using debt to lever something up or to leverage it up, your results will be magnified. Debt magnifies your results. So let's look at here in your text. It says the degree of operating leverage is contribution margin divided by net operating income. Contribution margin divided by net operating income. So for every dollar of contribution margin, how many dollars of net operating income or profit do you get? So that's the question. Let's look at the bicycle company. The bicycle company has a contribution margin of $100,000. It has net income of $20,000. 100,000 divided by 20 is 5. So you have a degree of operating leverage of 5. So, or 5.0, obviously could be a fraction. These just happen to be round numbers. So we have a degree of operating leverage of 5. What does that mean? Well, if you put it into words, it says with an operating leverage of 5, if the bicycle company increases its sales by 10%, its net operating income would increase by 50%. Its net operating income goes up 5 times faster than its contribution margin. So if you can get more contribution margin, you'll have more net income. So that's an interesting thing to know about a company, is how much operating leverage it has. So we want to look for the verification here. We have operating leverage. The actual sales are 250. If we increase the sales 10% to 275, we increase the variable expenses accordingly to the larger quantity volume, subtract for the contribution margin, subtract our fixed expenses. Our operating income goes from 20 to 30, and our sales only went up from 250 to 275. So a 10% of sales increase from 250 to 275 took net income or profits up from 20,000 to 30,000. That's a 50% increase in profits. So we can see that leverage is very important in whether you are making tons of money or not. It's very important to know your leverage. Now, here's the thing. It goes both ways. So if sales had fallen 10%, things would be worse, right? So let's look at Coffee Klatch before we get into that. Coffee Klatch, it's got its 1,300 and 2,100 cups and blah, blah, blah. Question is, what is the operating leverage? So we can see that from the actual cups. Sales are 31.29, variable expenses 756, contribution margin 23.73, fixed 1,300, operating income is 1,073, and if we divide 23.73 by 1,073, we have a operating leverage of 2.21. So the bicycle company was levered 5 to 1. This is levered 2.21 to 1. So what does that mean? It means, if we go to the next slide, if sales increased 20%, what would net operating income increase? Well, a 20% increase in sales would multiply by the degree of operating leverage of 2.21. 20% times 2.21 is 44.2. So if you increased your contribution margin by 20%, you would increase your profits by 44.2%. That sounds pretty good. Now, I don't know that you're going to run a coffee place or a bicycle place, but most of you are going to end up looking at real estate or buying a house at some point in your life, and this definitely applies there. So let me give you one extra slide. It's not in your textbook, but I think it's very important that you understand this works all kinds of finance, including personal finance, because numbers don't know where they're being used. So this slide is, what's another word for debt? Well, it's leverage. So a house price here, you've borrowed $400,000 for your $500,000 house, and you put $100,000 down. That's your down payment or your equity in the home. The house price goes up $10,000 to 10% to $550,000. You still owe the bank the loan or most of it, and so the equity has actually gone up from 100 to 150. So the 10% increase in the house price has given you a 50% increase in your returns. So a 10% increase in the price gave you a 50% increase in your returns. Why? Because you had leverage. You had $400,000 of their money and only $100,000 of your money in there, so it was 4-to-1 leverage. And so you can see that you took out you took off skyrocketing in your own money because you're not sharing it with the bank. So when you think of houses and how people make so much money in them, well, if you put 10% down or 20% down onto a house, and the house goes up, you get 100% of the return. It all goes to you. You're the owner of the house. It never goes to the bank. You just have to keep making your payments to the bank. So that's how you go on the upside. It also works on the downside. So if you imagine, I didn't change the slide here, but you can easily imagine it. The house price goes down 10%. So it goes from 500 to 450. 450 minus 400 is 50,000, and now you've lost 50,000 or 50% of your money that you invested in the house. So leverage magnifies your result. Leverage magnifies your result, and leverage is another word for debt. So when you're whatever you buy on debt, it gets magnified, the result gets magnified, and if you buy appreciating assets, assets that go up in value, you make more money. If you buy assets that go down in value or depreciating assets, you make way less money. You go skyrocketing to the poorhouse. So you can see in the housing crisis what happened. On the way up, everybody got rich. On the way down, everybody got poor. And you're like, oh my gosh, how could this happen? Well, it's because everybody was borrowing like crazy, and it's all in leverage. So when you start thinking about debt, debt is another word for leverage, so it's going to magnify your result. It's just simply going to magnify your result. That's what you should be thinking of when you take out a loan. So in a house, more than likely, most houses over time go up in value. Not always, of course, for sure, we've learned that. But other things that you borrow on do not go up in value. For example, cars. I don't know about your car, but my car eventually will be worth nothing. And when it's worth nothing, we don't want to borrow too much money to pay for a car, because we know that that additional interest and so on is not going to pay off. We're not leveraging up. We're actually leveraging down. We're going to be losing money on our cars eventually. So when you think about it, where do you want to use debt? You want to use it for appreciating assets, assets that are going to go up in value or pay off over time. So that concludes a very long chapter here on chapter 5 on cost, volume, and profit. But you can see that there has been a significant number of little technical details, little equations that would help any business owner manage their business. That is managerial accounting, not financial accounting. We're trying to make decisions. Do we have advertising? Do we not have advertising? Do we extend the product line and try to put our salespeople on commission? Do we not? This is all managerial accounting techniques, and it all covers in this this chapter. Pretty much everything that we've covered here can be used by any business person that's got decisions on cost, volume, and profit. So it's a really fantastic chapter because it's so involved in real-world decision making. I hope you've enjoyed it. We will move on to chapter 6.